Kathmandu, Nepal. Days before Nepal's most important elections in years, Maoist militants have opened fire on politicians, blown up vehicles, planted landmines and targeted civilians in dozens of attacks, injuring at least 17 people, some seriously. "We want this election to be dismissed," said Om Prakash Pun, a leader of a splinter political party leading the attacks. This month's elections, held in 2 stages starting on Sunday, will fill hundreds of positions at the national and regional levels in what political observers call the largest democratic exercise ever in this small, Himalayan nation. Nepal, a landlocked country between China and India, has struggled to maintain stability in the past 2 decades. In 2006, an insurgency led by Maoist sympathizers ended after rebels agreed to a peace agreement and the country transitioned from monarchy to democracy. Over 17,000 people had been killed over 10 years of fighting. But political discord delayed the adoption of a constitution until September 2015. By then, a series of devastating earthquakes had rattled the country, killing nearly 9,000 people and destroying hundreds of thousands of homes. Nepal has found it hard to rebuild from the quakes, in part because top leaders rotate out of their positions quickly, leading to chronic instability. Nepal has had 10 prime ministers in less than a decade. But despite the instability and violence, the voting has been seen as a potential bright spot. This year, Nepal held local elections for the first time in 2 decades. Now, voters are set to fill more than 800 seats in Nepal's parliament and state assemblies. They're a huge milestone in the country's history, Bhajaraj Pakarel, the former chief election commissioner, said of the elections, calling them part of a transformation from the old Nepal to a new Nepal. Activists hope that new leaders will deliver justice to thousands of victims who filed wartime grievances after the end of the Maoist insurgency. To date, only a handful of verdicts have been reached, in part because many politicians in power today were involved in the fighting. Ahead of the elections, K.P. Sharma Oli and Pushpa Kamal Dahal, 2 former prime ministers who belong to communist parties, have formed a coalition. Shifting allegiances are common in Nepal, but the coalition surprised some here because Mr. Dahal had aligned himself with the current prime minister, Sher Bahadur Dubba, during this year's local elections. In an interview, Mr. Pun, the Maoist leader, said the attacks his party organized this month were in protest against leaders like Mr. Dahal, who led the Maoist insurgency. Mr. Pun said Mr. Dahal, whose nom de guerre is Prachanda, or the Fierce One in Nepali, has backed away from more revolutionary ideas in order to appeal to voters. "Right now, our strategy is to target political leaders," Mr. Pun said, adding that the thousands of members of his party, the Nepal Communist Party, want to replace the country's parliamentary government with a socialist one committed to peace, prosperity, equity and sovereignty. So far, the attacks have been confined to districts that border Kathmandu, home to a few million people.